Welcome to the Mayor Series here at Greenleaf, where we're going around the country and talking to different mayors throughout the South. So today we have Josh Levy with us today from Hollywood, Florida. Josh, welcome to the podcast here.
Happy to be here.
So you've got a very unique city in that one, you've been there your whole life, but also you guys have a ton of different infrastructure that's available in one city, from ports to casinos, an amazing beach, all in one spot.
I'll tell you what, the city was founded 100 years ago, guys, and our founder had a vision for the city to be an all-year resort city. This is taking it back to the 1920s. We just celebrated our centennial, and that was a boom time for South Florida. Everybody from the north was discovering South Florida. A lot of investment, people buying lots, developers really developing cities, and their vision really brought us in South Florida to what South Florida is today, what Hollywood is today. So it's really exciting. And those elements that you mentioned, Dave, the seaport, what a casino means, the beach, the coastal area, those were what were envisioned even 100 years ago as to what would create a vibrant, regional area for people visiting and investing in the land boom of the 1920s. Here we are 100 years later, and it's those same elements that make it move. And so it's pretty amazing. We're just building on that founding vision all over the southeast coast of Florida here.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And you grew up in Hollywood too, right?
Yeah. Grew up here, and used to ride my bike in the neighborhoods. I actually live about 4 blocks away from where I grew up. That might sound a little boring, or it might tell you how happy we are where we live.
Yeah, and you're married too. Your wife is from Hollywood.
Yeah, she's born and raised here in Hollywood, and we're raising our 2 kids here, and we love it. We love it.
Andrew, you were from South Florida, but then you abandoned ship and came to Atlanta.
Yeah, well, my family probably did the same. Did your family do the exodus from New York in the 70s or 80s to come down here, or were they native? Josh?
My family from Israel, actually.
Your family's from Israel. Okay.
Yeah. So immigrant family. Father immigrates here. He lost a brother in the war in 1973, and had sent his parents to kind of go and visit other relatives who were already living in the United States. And grandmother came back and said, "Wow, every grape is like this and every apple is like that. You got to go see America." And so he came to America and really fell in love with what the country offered. And in the end, circumstances were that it was a lot easier to get a green card back then. While they were on vacation, I'll tell you real quick, a relative said, "Hey, you should apply for residency here while you're here." So they didn't think much of it. It wasn't on their mind. They applied. 6 months later, after they're back in Israel, they get a letter saying, "We've approved your application. You have 6 months to now come and move to the United States." And so they ended up pursuing that. And here we are, almost 50 years later.
In Florida, but they immigrated from Israel to Florida.
Yeah, I think there was a 3-week stint in New York, and the snow wasn't going to cut it for the people from the farming village.
Well, that is also interesting because usually New York is the place to go. My family, they're New York refugees, and they took advantage of the probably the $20,000 or $25,000 house in the 70s and 80s from New York City because they had no idea how they were ever going to afford a house in New York City, and so they made the exodus from New York to Florida, which I think Florida now is still full of New Yorkers from some generation, either 1 or 2 generations ago.
Yeah, and that was the same as we reflect to the 1920s. The market back then for Joe Young, our city founder, was to attract investors from the Northeast to buy these, South Florida lots. He was just selling lots back then and selling a dream, a vision for what he referred to as an all-year resort city, in America's winter wonderland. And everything was booming here until in 1926, a hurricane called the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 struck the entire southeast coast of South Florida and really wiped out the momentum of all of these cities, including Hollywood, which was just picking up. I think population went from a quick 2,500 to 25,000 right before the hurricane. And after the hurricane, it dropped right back down to that and didn't pick up until after the Great Depression, really in the 1950s. That was the story really of all of South Florida. If that hurricane hadn't happened, the entire, layout landscape of South Florida would have been different. There would have been a lot more of the vintage, 1920s, 30s, 40s construction, more so than what we have left today, but we have some amazing historical properties.
So Dave and I are always curious about, what prompts somebody to wake up one day and want to be mayor. So what was your journey like to being mayor? up until the time. I mean, you took office in 2016, and
Yep.
if I got it right, you did a few other things beforehand. But what was your journey like?
So, grew up in Hollywood, loved the city. Always kind of like brag to friends about, loving Hollywood. So you got to have that energy about the city. Just if it's inside of you, then that's at least a foundational sort of a spirit that you have about you. Didn't think about running for mayor at all. Went to law school, actually at Nova Southeastern University after UF. We talked about Gainesville offline, Andrew. But, started practicing law and then actually read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad and decided to leave my job at the international trade firm that I was fortunate to be hired to. And 6 months later, after opening up my own law office at the family business in Hollywood, the same author writes a book before you quit your job. A little too late for me. But in any case, it was a blessing how life rolled along. We ended up enabling to grow the family business. That led to me being, of course, in Hollywood, paying attention. I started really my volunteerism in about 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, as a civic association member and a board member, and then met a city commissioner and said, "Hey, Josh, you should, apply to be on our planning and zoning board." So the application process, expires tomorrow. You should get the application in. So I did. In any case, I was appointed to the board, and I, served, I think, about 11 years on the planning and zoning board. That led to me running for city commission, because once you're involved and you're kind of you look at decision making at the city level, you realize that local people make the local decisions, and that if you're watching a city council meeting, you realize that, hey, anyone who has the spirit and should have the know-how and should have the something to contribute, you can run as well, and you can lead the city. And so I actually had an unsuccessful run for city commission when I was younger in 2008. But the person who won the race, did a great job. I supported her for her reelection. But in 2016, I stayed involved. At that point, I was Civic Association president and still on the zoning board. Peter Bober announced that he was not going to seek reelection for his potential final term. And I knew from the minute I saw his letter that I was going to run, because I just wanted to contribute. I felt like the city needed a renaissance. I felt like, we needed to get the city government's attention on the renaissance the city needed, improve our older areas, everything from the downtown to the neighborhoods to infrastructure and beyond. And I knew that I could contribute. And so I filed papers and ran for office, and thankfully won in a landslide, won people's confidence. And here we are today, 10 years later.
Landslide, what was one opponent, multiple opponents?
At that time, I had 3 opponents. One was a state senator who had just termed out, a city commissioner who was just, looking to move from commissioner to mayor. And here I was, someone who had very little name recognition compared to theirs. And when they said, "Josh, how do you think you're going to win? You have 2% name recognition." I said, "Well, I haven't started my campaign yet." And so coming from a marketing background, my family had a car dealership, Hollywood Kia, here in the city. I knew, that I could get the word out and really be, grassroots. And thankfully, people saw in me, what they wanted the city's future to be led by, as opposed to, the older, sort of close to retirement incumbents that were in that race.
Yeah.
So, it was a generational shift, and also I think I just connected more with people and Hollywood and what it is today.
So no runoff. You won outright the first time, or did you have to do a runoff?
Yeah, no, we don't have runoffs here. So I won, I think, with like over a 20-point margin. I had more votes than all my opponents combined.
Gotcha.
I'll do it.
Yeah. And thankfully, I won every precinct, and that really felt good, because, I think at the time we had about 40 some odd precincts, and I had a majority in every single precinct. So that tells you across every socioeconomic, part of the city, and we're diverse and we're big, over 150,000 residents. Every neighborhood, every precinct felt like I was, in majority, the best choice. That felt great, because it's across the spectrum more than just winning. And I'll tell you, also in my final reelection after being elected unopposed in 2020, the same. I won in a over 20-point landslide in 2024. And maybe I missed 2 precincts this time because of a particular development project, a public-private partnership that a couple of neighborhoods in the city, were opposed to. But in any case, I grateful to have the support of our electors here, and continue to do the work.
Yeah, Josh. I mean, the city that you're in is we see that as very unique. The fact that you have such a large port, you have an enormous casino presence that is there, and then you have a huge visitor tourism component with the beach. How do you go in as mayor managing those three kind of like, those aren't residents that have a house there. Those are huge, components of a city. How do you balance those three with, the everyday person that lives in Hollywood and wants to know, hey, how do we make this place a great place for families to grow up and have a life here?
So sometimes there is a friction between different commercial uses, industrial uses, and people living, like you said, in a single family home and wanting a quiet front yard and a backyard for to raise a family. But thankfully, our city was planned in its layout and is, I think, appropriately designed in a manner that protects single family and residential areas. We have, of course, multifamily mixed areas that have a little bit of friction as single family homes that were always zoned for potential multifamily mixed use. Suddenly, investors are taking advantage of the zoning that's there and opting for the mixed use opportunity to replace the existing single family home. So we have those areas in our regional activity center and in our State Road 7 corridor that have a little bit of that friction. But when you talk about the big economic drivers like the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino or Port Everglades, they're adequately separated from through at least arterial roadways and a little bit of geography from the single family homes. And so they're big economic drivers. The port, I think, supports over 13,000 direct and direct jobs. Indirect jobs are in the hundreds of thousands. All of the South Florida and other counties included. Petroleum comes in through Port Everglades. We're the one hub where jet fuel and petroleum and energy come through the seaport. We're one of the top cruise line ports in the world with I think about 2 million passengers a year now, if not more. And for cargo as well, we're always pushing the needle, and we're a big hub for the Caribbean on cargo. So cargo, cruise, and energy, Port Everglades is really critical and is a big, again, economic engine for us. We call it the powerhouse port. As for the casino, we have actually it's operated by Hard Rock International, which is owned by the Seminole Tribe of Florida. So they manage the casino, and so they do an amazing job. They built this beautiful guitar-shaped hotel. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It has a light network across its entire facade, and also shoots the 6 strings of the guitar actually shoot into the sky. And at night they change color, and it's a sight to see. And so that casino is a big economic driver itself. Over 5,000 employees in that driver. So we're fortunate to have that. These are important engines for employment. And so we balance it, Dave, Andrew, and Josh. Not without its friction. Sometimes I get some tomatoes thrown at me.
I mean, the port, I mean, it's such a unique thing to have for us. You think about, we're talking to mayors across the country. The port is such a unique thing to have relative to, you're talking about a mayor in Nebraska, let's say. There's no port right for Nebraska. So, like, what's it like? I mean, with that amount of commerce coming in and out, that amount of transient people coming in and out, is like priorities of that port. Obviously, safety is always number one. But like, walk us through kind of how you are involved with that port as your duties as mayor.
So, Port Everglades is a regional port. Over 80% of it is within the city of Hollywood. It's situated really ideally right next to the international airport, Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Very easy to get in and out of. The Florida Department of Transportation and the county have done a great job into creating connectivity for the seaport and the airport and the interstate network to move cargo and move people in an efficient way that doesn't have much impact on city property. And while the city of Hollywood port is within 80% of it is within Hollywood, we have a neighboring city called Dania Beach where the port has a little bit of a slice in Dania, and the north part is in Fort Lauderdale, and we all share the accommodation that's required to make the port function and to provide the accessory type uses that are needed for the port to operate, and whether it's warehousing, industrial, terminals for all the energy uses, and of course hotels and restaurants for all of the cruise passengers that come in and out. On a busy day, just imagine we could have 10 cruise ships at the seaport and over 55,000 people embarking on a cruise ship in one day. So that's a ton of people moving in, and the system has to be efficient into getting them all on their ships and sailing out of the channel. But I'll tell you what, I don't want to take all the credit. The county operates the actual port operation itself, and we work with them closely and support. And at the same time, though, we have the sheriff's office that provides police and fire, and there's a whole port authority, so to speak, not in its independent sense, but in its departmental operation that runs the port. So we're proud, and it's growing.
All right. Yeah. So one of the things in the news a lot lately is kind of the comments that is Florida going to look at trying to get rid of some of their property taxes, maybe just on the residential side or overall. But I mean, that's a huge portion of city and county budgets.
Yeah.
Is property tax rate that don't go to the state level. But is that something you've been talking to residents about what would this look like if that happened?
Yeah, so it's definitely would be a challenging prospect. I'll say that. In the way in which Florida works here, there's no income tax. So, municipal services, county services, libraries, parks, police, fire, public works, public utility, the school district, the hospital system, we all rely on ad valorem revenue on property taxes as the largest source of our revenue, which we operate the municipal services through and have rely on to improve infrastructure and do all the things that a city is expected to do. So when you talk about the state looking to slash that, and while I understand it from a cost of living standpoint, trust me, I'd rather see, of course, on a personal level, who wouldn't want to see their property tax bill be slashed or go away. On the other hand, we have to understand that these essential governmental services rely on it, and that we can't necessarily do away with that source of revenue without replacing it with a different source of revenue to maintain, for example, police and fire services. So, the governor's talked about it. He's challenged the legislature to put an item on the ballot, which would be in November of 2026, about 6 months from now, for the voters of the state of Florida to decide. It needs to win by 60%. But so far, while the Florida House put together a number of proposals, the Florida Senate hasn't budged. They do have the potential. He is expected to call a special session, and one of those items to be the property tax question and whether or not they're going to put a question on the ballot. So we don't know if that's going to be placed on the ballot or in what form it would be if it were placed on the ballot. My hunch, having seen some interviews with the governor, and while again it's up to the legislature to put it on the ballot, but the governor, I think, in the end will be pushing perhaps a reduction or an increase in the homestead exemption here that exempts a certain extra amount of your taxable value to be exempt from taxation. So I don't see it being eliminated. I see it being perhaps reduced by a certain percentage and perhaps phased over 10 years, because you can't just shock the system of all the cities, 412 of us in Florida, and say, okay, you now have, in our case, eliminating the, for example, all homestead properties from having to pay municipal property taxes would slash over $50 million from our budget. And we would have to cut services. We would have to cut jobs. We'd have to reduce police, reduce fire, paramedics. That's not the trajectory we've been on. We've been on a tear to improve and expand and better serve our residents. And this would just take us back. It would roll back the revenue probably a good 8 years. And what we've been able to build over the past 10, which has admittedly been a doubling of our revenue, because our property values in Hollywood have basically doubled over the past 10 years. That's great for me as mayor because I have more to work with to deliver the services that our residents want and our businesses need. So while and mind you, we also are mindful that, as values have gone up, so have property taxes. For the past 2 years, we've very slightly, although it tells you the direction, we've reduced our property tax rate, our millage rate, ever so slightly, I will admit. But nonetheless, we recognize that government needs to restrain itself as well. The governor might look at, all the cities and say, hey, you guys are, taking in twice what you did, but you operated your cities 10 years ago. So maybe you didn't need this and you should be cutting taxes by half. And if you're not going to do it, I'll do it for you. But, there's so much investment that needs to be done. We talked earlier about how the city's 100 years old. Well, some of our infrastructure is aging. And whether that's, underground stormwater systems or lack thereof, or wastewater, you name it, we have investments, that will take us through the next 20 years, and we're not done yet. So we really rely on having stable, revenue come in. And again, while I'm sensitive to the cost of living, I I can tell you that it's not being wasted. So we have work to do here.
Yeah.
Dave, Josh and I were talking about this at lunch today, but like, I mean, you obviously have the hurricanes, and how do your infrastructure conversations? You have obviously drainage, you have beach issue, you have damage from storms, and how do you? What is your are hurricanes ultimately going to be your impact to your budget? Is it the county budget? Is it the state budget? But when you have like your infrastructure damaged, or when you need your infrastructure shored up, like on your beaches, or what do you do?
Yeah, so look, every city in Florida is required to have emergency reserves. We're required to balance our budget and maintain a certain level of reserves for those emergencies. So we have that, but if we, like we did in, I think it was 2017, about a year after I was mayor, we had a hurricane here, Hurricane Irma, and we had to respond. We didn't get, thankfully, a Category 5, landfall, but we had damage. We had a lot of debris, and we needed to coordinate all the departments you would expect. We have emergency contracts with debris removal companies that are ready to react. I mean, South Florida, if you lived here for enough years, you're familiar with how to respond to hurricanes. We're fortunate that we get almost a week's heads up that something's forming, and a couple of days. We're all watching the track of the storm very closely in the 48 hours in advance, and you do your best to equipment and assets where they need to be to respond to anything. And now, if you have a lot of beach erosion and damage, you need to take care of it. In South Florida, the beach erosion, what you do is you renourish the beach from sand from up in the quarries in Central Florida. It's not a cheap undertaking. The federal government usually assists with 75% of that. Then the state does, and then the locals have a small percentage. But those are, years in the making always. And so you might get some hotspot, emergency renourishment dollars if a hurricane damages the beaches here to a significant extent, because we talked about how we're a big tourist economy here, and we have a lot of hospitality assets, and that's important for the entire country, not just South Florida. The federal government understands that that's important to maintain, and so the beaches are something we all invest in. Creates a lot of international and domestic, visitation, and brings in a lot of dollars, and that supports the national economy also, not just our local economy. So we all want to see recovery be quick. FEMA, of course, comes in and helps. SBA comes in and helps if need be. A lot of government partners. If you're in a ground zero on a storm.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, the beach. You have this boardwalk that's like a huge component of Hollywood, and I mean, a major tourism driver that's there. Was that part of the original vision for the city?
That goes back to good old Joe Young that we talked about. In the beginning, he had a vision for a publicly accessible broad walk. And we still obviously call it the Broad Walk today. It's about 2 miles, beautiful. Paver was redone in about 2010, named one of the 10 best public spaces by the American Planning Association after it was completed, the renovation. And it really is such a beautiful opportunity to stroll along the beach. We've got restaurants and shops on one side of the Broad Walk and the sandy beach on the other. No cars in sight, and it's unique to South Florida. It's really the only beach here where you can, again, stroll and have ice cream shops and pizza shops and seafood restaurants, and all along the coastline for miles, and have the beautiful beach. We, just to toot our horn, we've been placing at the TripAdvisor top 15 beaches in the country for many years in a row now. We've been as high as number 4 and number 5. For some reason, we're number 15 this year, or 14. But I'll take it as long as we're on the list, and that goes through the number of reviews and the types of customers and participants post. But we have millions of visitors here. It was just a number of years ago. We have one of our biggest hotels here is the Diplomat Beach Resort, which was just purchased by a group called Trinity, $800 million purchase. They invested a lot more money into the hotel and now branded it as a Signia by Hilton property. We just celebrated the Signia rebranding just two weeks ago. Hilton and Trinity, really amazing. It's the largest convention hotel in the county with 1,000 rooms, and it's a big economic driver. People love it, and I was speaking there a number of years ago, and sometimes we have the opportunity to, on a private side, I won't say as if it's at my invitation or my doing, but we've had president of a national figure. So there's a lot of significant history here to Hollywood. We're in what we call the 50-yard line of South Florida, and so we have a lot of action here, as you pointed out, whether it's through or because of the casino and our connectivity with the port and the airport and the Diplomat Beach Resort, which is that large convention hotel. People love visiting here. My point actually of mentioning when I had welcomed him to the city, he said, "Josh, our mom used to bring us here as kids to Hollywood Beach, and we would vacation here on a recurring basis." And just someone seeing the Vice President of the United States, not knowing him personally, whether I'm a mayor or not is irrelevant. I never imagined that he was someone who even knew the city of Hollywood, Florida, and was visiting here, as a kid, and has this nostalgia. And was millions of people visit Hollywood every year, and Hollywood Beach, and it really is. I think we do have a global presence, and sometimes we don't realize that as people who live here, but we do see millions every year.
So if you're looking to move to Florida, or you're looking at Hollywood from a real estate perspective, or starting a business, like what do you think is like most enticing about the location, the real and opportunities to start something there?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, we are in the 50-yard line of South Florida, but Hollywood, I think, uniquely, and there are a lot of suburban cities to our west, all the way to the Everglades, but we're a coastal city in South Florida, part of that original 1920s boom set of cities. And so we, I think, offer that location, right? Real estate, that location of being central at where we are in the context of the various downtowns in South Florida, the arts districts, the entertainment, and jobs close to job centers, whether it's in Hollywood and downtown Fort Lauderdale or downtown Miami. Our location really provides a lot of connectivity, but at the same time, we've really maintained, I think, a beautiful feel, a hometown feel, densely built city, even though we have a downtown that's booming right now with a lot of new, 2,000 residential units, and we're creating, our urban center in our own Hollywood way, but it has a unique character. It feels like home here. So I think what's attractive about Hollywood is that while you're in the mix and in the middle of Metro South Florida, you really feel like you're at home in Hollywood, and there's a lot of neighborhoods. There's mixed use neighborhoods, all close to or on the coast, on the beach, and so I think people are drawn to that, and they see that when they decide which city should I live in South Florida. That doesn't keep me too far in the suburbs, close to the action, but also a quiet night's sleep while I'm there.
In Hollywood, what part of Hollywood do you see as the best kind of opportunity to invest in real estate, whether it's single family or commercial? That maybe there's a section that you're like, man, I'd love to see this invested in, redeveloped, approved. We're normally looking at distressed buildings that are not occupied for a series of reasons. Like, the building that we're sitting in right now, it was really just a change of use. It was an old call center, and call centers not really being located in suburban Atlanta anymore. So, we had the opportunity to buy a vacant building and retrofit it. Where do you see opportunities like that?
Yeah, so we have actually two districts that where we focus our efforts to want to see invested in, and have created the zoning to allow that, and give it a priority from a city economic development push and market sort of market catalyst standpoint. In and around downtown Hollywood is the regional activity center, we call it. It's 1,400 acres from basically, if you have the beach and you go across the intracoastal waterway, you have our first legacy single family neighborhood called the Lakes neighborhood, and then that is abutted at the west side by US 1 Federal Highway. And so from that point on Federal Highway all the way across the downtown area to west of Dixie Highway, we've got 1,400 acres that span north, south, and our big focus area, it's called the Regional Activity Center. We've put in mixed use zoning there, and are where we want to see reinvestment, such as the type that you're referring to, Josh. Dixie Highway has traditionally been an industrial commercial area, and now we want to see the repurposing of buildings like you described. And it also happens to be where there's sizable lots and industrial type lots that are larger in acreage, and whether it's that or Federal Highway, we want to see the reinvestment, the reimagining of properties. Now that we're 100 years old, you can imagine that some areas are require, need, and deserve, and we want to see reinvestment. Sometimes we want to see demolition and reconstruction, And sometimes we just want to see, something vibrant, happen with old property. And I think, a lot of stagnation that you might see anywhere in the United States or in the world is sometimes the result of the same person has owned the property for 40 years. And, the generations, get to the point where sometimes they're not ready, willing, or able to reinvest in the property the way it ought to be reinvested in. And so sometimes as mayor, my job, I think, is to, call that longtime owner and say, hey, look at this direction that we have for this area of the city. Exciting opportunity for you if you want to jump in and do that. But if you're not a builder, you're not someone who's capable or interested in reimagining, we can introduce you to people who are and try to, help them, get through that next phase of their life with their property, and help them get a beautiful sale out of it or be a part of it. Sometimes, that doesn't succeed and you have someone who kind of holds back an area because, it's still mom and pop and it's going to stay that way. But we have the Regional Activity Center, and then on the west side along our State Road 7 corridor, about 880 acres also of area that's mixed, commercial, residential, multifamily, where we want to see investment in. And so, affordable housing is a big issue here. And so, on State Road 7, for example, it's always been commercial. And we acted as a catalyst to put in high-rise residential along State Road 7 as a city and state-funded workforce housing project, for example, in one part of it. And now you're seeing market rate projects come in on State Road 7 and bring in, mid-rise and high-rise residential where there was never any, since, in history. And so, sometimes we have to sort of prove to the market that a product can work in a certain area. And sometimes we take action, whether it's as a CRA, a community redevelopment agency, as a city government, or, working with the private sector and just pushing and prodding and, trying to make deals happen. It's, sometimes people, don't realize that the mayor of a city needs to also be, the salesperson for the city. And I see that in myself, and needing to do that's part of the job. It was our city's founders. He was a big promoter of selling a vision, and we still need to promote today. We're in competition with other cities, and they're not standing still. So I see us as having, of course, to keep pushing the needle, keep pushing the market, keep pushing ourselves, keep refreshing our zoning code, to accommodate our building permit process, to accommodate all the investment that we want to see.
It's funny you said when you said the permit process. We had a discussion with the mayor of Hutto, Texas, which is just north of Austin, and it's a quickly growing suburb that Austin has really expanded into. And one of the things they put in place was what was it, Dave? It was 30-day permits guaranteed.
They'll get feedback in 10 days.
10 days. And so what we see, in our world is the biggest, I would say, hindrance to doing a project or starting a project and completing a project and getting CO is the permitting process.
Yeah, and that's the biggest bottleneck is that we have over 11,000 permits applied for every year, and so for the past few years we actually invested heavily in the building division, and all the ancillary departments that require to be a part of the plan review and things and inspection. More staff, a new workplace for all of those divisions, more technology, and putting all that together, new software, all to make the permit process move as quickly as possible. Having expedited 24-hour permits for the everyday homeowner permits for air conditioners and roofs and things like that, but also realizing that all that we want for our city needs to flow through the building division, whether it's what we're asking private property owners to do, or even for the city itself. When we build a new, community facility, it needs to get its permits. And so we need that, that department to not be a bottleneck and to push and to facilitate everything. And so, again, making, historical investments in that. It's not 100% yet, I will tell you, but we're pushing, and we have the second phase of our new software rollout happening in August, where all the commercial and residential projects, all of them are now going to be flowing through the Acela system, which enables simultaneous plan review by different disciplines and keeps our staff accountable and keeps applicants more connected to the status of their permit. So we're doing all of that, and thankfully we've made a lot of headway. But yeah, that's a critical part of it. And I'll tell you, this is where we get a good push from the state legislature. Sometimes they pass, like this year, they continue to pass laws that require cities to, do plan review and to turn permits within a certain amount of time. It's what we call an unfunded mandate. But sometimes I'm happy when we get a mandate that pushes our team to say, hey, you got to go. This is now law. And I'm happy for them to have that pressure because I want the permits out.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
From a business standpoint, in the permit space and zoning and building, what's kind of like your number one metric you look at to say like, hey, team, are we doing a good job on this part, or do we have a higher and better target we want to aim for? Is there any one defined metric that you're using to convey that message and that leadership?
Yeah, usually, like you said, Dave, it's how quickly do we look at plans submitted? How quickly after request do we inspect the property? And you want to keep it on a reasonable timeline, whether that's 7 days or 10 days. In my view, depending on the permit type, it ought to be even, next day or finish it all up in a few days. For the larger project, we understand they're more complex, but we don't want, files sitting on a desk waiting in line. I want them seen and I want them reviewed so that even if the applicant needs to respond to new comments, at least give it to them and let them respond. Sometimes you have a slow architect, low GCs on the applicant side, and the property owner thinks it's the city, and it's not. But we need to do our part and push things along and keep the property owner informed. One thing that some cities may not realize is really helpful is, if we're doing our job okay and the property owner doesn't know about it and their architect or GC is a little slow in responding to what the city needs or submitting in the first place, and the owner might not know, having an alert for the owner on every status of the review process helps the owner be aware and helps the owner call their GC and say, hey, what are we doing with this city comment? Let's go. The ball's in our court now. So that's one thing that I instituted here that has really helped a lot to get, again, the owners aware and for them to push their own team to respond and realize, they have work to do too.
Yeah, transparency is always helpful.
Yeah.
If you can push more of it, it's great. So Josh, you've got 2 more years, right, left in mayor. It ends in 2028.
Yeah.
What would you say, between now and then, what's the biggest thing you want to see accomplished in Hollywood?
Well, I'll tell you, we've been on a great run here for the past 10 years, ushering in really record private and public investment into the city. Talked about the thousands of units that are already built and also, planned or underway or expected in the downtown area, even greater amount. We've shown that the State Road 7 corridor can now be a mixed residential district, not just commercial. The beach is undergoing over $100 million of infrastructure work to make it most storm resilient. As we discussed, storms here in South Florida, we're making a lot of investments. We have made them. We've created an opportunity with the county to where we have more than any other city here, opportunities for people to apply our low to moderate income neighborhoods to get new roofs, impact windows, driveways done through a fund that we created with the county where we had excess dollars in our redevelopment district for the beach. Said, hey, let's move it to the LMI neighborhoods. That's underway and helping lots of people. So I want to build on all that and see the city flourish. We need to continue to make significant high dollar investments in our infrastructure. Water and wastewater is something that we were just kind of like alerted to the needs there. And so that's going to take a front seat in the years ahead. We're just completing a brand new police headquarters this year. We've made some generational investments through a general obligation bond that we had passed by the voters in 2019. New golf courses, new police headquarters, neighborhood investments, resiliency investment, and all those have come to fruition. And I'll tell you real quick on golf, I want to finish up 2 other golf courses. Our Orangebrook Golf Course, we did a P3 where the developer is going to be, we gave them the development rights to build 3 towers, 750 units in total on the far end of a 250-acre double 18-hole golf course that the city owns. Also to build a golf resort hotel on the property. By giving them those entitlements, they're investing $40 million into our double 18-hole golf course on their dime. The public's going to get a great benefit. We want to see that through. Actually, Reese Jones, if you're golfers, is the golf course architect. That's like the Vince Lombardi of golf course designer. So that'll be beautiful. We've got Shell Bay, another trophy golf course, and partially in our city and to the city to our south, where it's like $1 million buy-in. And then we have a Jack Nicklaus course and a Greg Norman. So we're going to be kind of finalizing and bringing to fruition these golf course reinvestments. That'll be undergoing in the next 2 years. But I want to see everything that we build on flourish, Dave, Andrew, and Josh, and take it to the next level to the best we can. Our downtown, has seen thousands of new units come in, and we want to now fill in storefronts that are created through that investment, new storefronts, and bring in business and create lively, places for people to enjoy. So lots of continuing work. My father told me once after I kind of said, "Hey, look at all we've done." He said, "Josh, don't forget the work is never done." And as every year goes by, as you renew certain areas, other areas are aging, and so you have to keep responding to areas that need attention. Whether it's year 101 for Hollywood or year 201, my guess is it'll always be the same. You'll always need to reinvest and help people succeed in their world, and help our families, our kids succeed. In the end, we talk a lot about real estate and placemaking, and we love that, right? But in the end, it's about providing people with opportunity to raise a family, and to Hollywood is their home, and we want to make sure that this city facilitates their upward mobility, their enjoyment of life, and that's what we're here for. So it's a privilege to be the mayor of a city, and help shepherd it through the years that I have the office, and just want to do the best job we can, and we're on our way to having Hollywood be the best that it could be for everyone.
Yeah.
And Josh, I want to circle back to this, but Dave is thinking in his head right now, how do I get an invite to those golf courses? Very important.
Once that one's renovated, that sounds amazing. Getting Reese Jones to come down and build something out, it's going to be pretty special.
Actually opened the Hollywood Beach Golf Club, where the city had done the renovation, $20 million investment in that golf course, and it's busy from morning till night, and it's beautiful, and a really nice open open to the neighborhood, and it's now really create like a golfing community. And so I want to capture all those cruise ship passengers, make sure that before or after their cruise, they're coming to Hollywood for a few rounds of golf.
Perfect. Cool.
Leveraging that port, as you kind of pointed out.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Josh, thank you very much. We enjoyed talking to you. It sounds like Hollywood is in great hands and has a very bright future.
Thank you all. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about Hollywood, and thanks for highlighting what cities do through your program.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.